Now, the National Assembly last week voted against forming an ad hoc committee to probe the allegations of widespread corruption and criminal cartels at Eskom. A parliamentary statement said that a draft resolution brought before the House by DA Leader John Steenhuisen, titled "The Establishment of an Ad Hoc Committee to Inquire the Full Extent of the Alleged Widespread Corruption and Unabated Operations of Criminal Networks and Cartels at Eskom," was rejected by 201 members of the National Assembly, while 115 voted for the motion. Meanwhile, Electricity Minister Kgosientsho Ramokgopa has said that corruption is not a key issue affecting the performance of some of Eskom's power plants. The minister also said that anti-loadshedding, we'll come back to that, but anti-loadshedding activist and organizer at StandUp SA Khustaz Mtwentwe and Matthew Cruz, head of business intelligence and public relations at Hohm Energy, are joining us now virtually for this discussion. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live. Let me start by asking both of you what you made of the outcome of that vote in Parliament at the end of last week. Let me start with you, Matthew.
Thank you for having me on the show. So yes, this outcome is almost expected from the ANC. It's very similar to the call by John Steenhuisen for investigation into Fala and for a similar committee to be put together to investigate the corruption. It's a standard response from the ANC just to say no to anything that the DA says about corruption. But when you pair that with what the electricity minister says, you start to get an idea about the way in which the ANC will go about addressing these allegations of corruptions and kind of just denying that it's going on and not really being open with the public about what is happening. And so it's a standard response, unfortunately, from the ANC just to put their head in the sand and say nothing.
Khustaz?
Sakina, it comes as no surprise. You must understand that that's how the ANC has always worked. They've always offered lip service when it comes to dealing with corruption. But when it comes to the real unearthing of corruption, they always are consistent in what they do. Whether it was the cover-up of the arms deal back then, whether it was the resistance to the state capture or Zondo Commission, it comes as no surprise. They are good at offering lip service, and most of the time they always get away with it.
So if we look at what's currently happening at Eskom, the overall power crisis in the country, one would imagine that at the very least, regardless of whether the ANC is keen on really getting to the bottom of the corruption that's bedeviling Eskom, that they would want to know overall exactly what the situation is and what's led us to this, especially given some of the allegations by the former CEO, Andre de Ruyter. So how do you explain then to the public why the ANC would not be interested in something like this? And you kind of touched on it, Matthew.
Yes, so my thinking as to why the ANC would not be interested in a probe that sought to understand the extent of corruption within Eskom and the connections to the ANC is that if such a probe did actually have to happen and it was effective and it was independent and allowed to operate to determine the root causes of where the corruption is stemming from, that you would find that the majority of the people that are involved from the ANC side in Eskom are actually implicated, unfortunately.
I mean, we had the Minister of Electricity basically saying that corruption is not a key issue affecting the performance of some of Eskom's power plants there, Khustaz. How do we interpret that, given what we've seen, what we've heard, and not only from those at Eskom, but also journalists have done some sterling work in uncovering some of the corruption and malfeasance taking place at Eskom?
Well, let's acknowledge that the minister is still new on his portfolio, but also let's not forget he's a seasoned ANC leader who, as they go into election, they would not want to be associated with corruption, not now. Hence, a probe at Eskom would reveal so much more, and it would cause a lot of damage for them. We know how much heat they took at the Zondo Commission, and it was very clear that ANC was accused number one there. Even here, there's a possibility that it could be that case. So as a minister and as a leader of the ANC, he has to try by all means to move ANC away from corruption at Eskom, even though we know that actually there are more likely chances that they are accused number one there. So he has to politic along the way to save the ANC.
Khustaz, you've said previously that parliamentarians are not patriotic, that they are used as gatekeepers for patronage. And if that is the case, what would the nation have to do to get out of a situation such as this?
South Africans need to start to reimagine different politics. The kind of politics that we have, I will use the word, they're truly rotten to the core. They do not serve the interest of the South African public. So we're gonna have to try to find different kinds of people within our society. One, who love this country. Two, who are very patriotic. The current crop that we have in Parliament are not patriotic. Those people don't represent the interests of the South African citizen. They represent the interests of their parties, and there is a problem. So we're gonna have to try to find a way to mobilize societies and obviously people who are interested in the governing of this country to say, look, let's come up with a model that would actually put South Africa's interest at heart. At the moment, we are lacking on that, unfortunately.
So, Matthew, coming back to you, if you listen to what the former CEO, Andre de Ruyter, had to say in one of his revelations, he says that Eskom loses about R1 billion in corruption every single month. And, of course, this in addition to other shenanigans around contracts and substandard coal and a whole list of things going on at the power utility. Just that in itself, one would imagine we need to get to the bottom of. How can Parliament sit there and be okay with the power utility losing that amount of money? Because if for no other reason, one would imagine that they would want to get to the bottom of this to test the veracity of Andre de Ruyter's assertions there about what is going on.
Yes, and that's a very good commentary. One of the questions that I had when we saw the ANC asking Andre de Ruyter to please report to the police within 7 days who the minister is, was that my thinking was that he did already report upwards through the correct reporting lines of the overseeing minister to Pravin Gordhan who the minister is that he found out was involved in rampant corruption in Eskom. And so my thinking is, well, Eskom corruption, the ANC seems to know who the parties are. They seem to have an understanding and awareness. The name was given to Pravin Gordhan. Why are we only hearing it from John Steenhuisen and not from the ANC themselves? Why are not the information that was handed over to the ANC government from Andre de Ruyter, why isn't that being revealed to the ANC? Why aren't they coming out and saying, oh, these are the people we're sorting it out. We're dealing with this corruption. And when we look at the R1 billion per day figure that was announced, that's nothing compared to the kind of corruption that happened when it came to the Medupi and Kusile deal. And one only has to look at the ownership of Mitsubishi Hitachi at the time by Chancellor House, when the contract was awarded ownership of 40%. That then was reversed, and now other decisions were made about the tender once it was awarded to Mitsubishi at the time, to see that actually it was corruption then as well that caused the issues that we're seeing now, because the electricity minister mentioned that the failure at Kusile Power Station was not due to corruption, but I would say that it was, because if the money was correctly spent and it was done by the correct parties, then we wouldn't have these engineering failures that we're seeing at these old power stations as well. So I would say corruption has been there, it's still here, and unfortunately something needs to change in order for us to not have corruption anymore.
But how would we go about changing that? And I'm back to you, Khustaz, on this one, because, the public, the electorate at large, sitting, watching, listening, but what do you do? Because it is clear that the systems that are in place are not going to yield the sort of results that the electorate necessarily wants. And that in itself, I think, can be debated, because the majority party could debate that the electorate has given them the mandate to act on their behalf. But if in general, people are not happy about what is happening at Eskom. They want to test the veracity of the allegations that have been made, staggering allegations. Where to now? What does the public do?
You see, the disappointing thing is that we have an electoral system that forces us to elect political parties. Now, that on its own is a flaw in our system, because we are then beholden to political parties. So what needs to happen is we need to review the electoral system as a whole. We've got to be able to elect people who are of integrity directly into parliament, so that those people are able to serve their constituencies if there was to be such a situation like that. Now, as you can see, when they updated the election law, you can see even now an independent has to get 90,000 votes each just for one seat. That's beyond what the political parties can do. So we have a problem with the electoral law. At the same time, the political parties need not to be given the amount of power that they have. It has to be diluted if we are to get out of this quagmire, because as things stand right now, people are serving political parties, and this does not serve the public. So we must push to make sure that the electoral law is reviewed and completely shaken down, because as things stand, independents must get, 10,000 votes? That's what it should be, so that we know that we dilute that system and to make sure that South Africans are well represented where they live.
But that in itself is not a guarantee. We've seen this at local government level, where people come in as independent candidates, and before you know it, it is business as usual. So how does one guarantee that, for example, matters such as these are actually heard, and it is not a majoritarian system that takes precedence? Shouldn't we be looking at perhaps smaller tweaks in the system? You know, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking maybe where you would have a one party, one vote type of system when it comes to some of these matters. But how do we come to bringing those sort of changes about, Matthew?
Yes, so now we're starting to get into the political sphere, which is unfortunately not my forte. I'm just an energy expert. But the thinking is very correct in terms of having a one party, one vote on certain topics. Like, for instance, what should we do for the future of the energy sector? Should we exclusively just invest only in solar farms and wind farms and very minimally in batteries, and no gas and no nuclear, as we're kind of seeing is the plans of the ANC coming out in the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, where the 500 billion that's associated to new generation capacity, which is what we really need to get out of load shedding, the 500 billion is allocated exclusively between solar farms and wind farms, and 5% is allocated to batteries. There's no gas, there's no nuclear, there's no transitionary real plan to go between coal to renewables. It's just straight to renewables, which we know doesn't really provide power at night from solar farms when we have the load shedding, because we have peak demand at the night, and wind is very intermittent as well. So that's not really going to be a solution for solving load shedding. Why is the ANC going that direction? We would like to see lots of different opinions and votes going into what is the direction going forward for South Africa. And I would love to see gas in there. I'd love to see nuclear, small modular reactors, but we're not seeing that.
But to that point, Matthew, I would also like to see the cost of all of these procurements, because, you know, for a long time we've been told that if we go the renewable energy route, it will become cheaper over time. Have we seen the evidence of that yet?
So I would say it would become cheaper over time by going renewables for power that's available during the day, because that's when you primarily get power from solar farms. And wind is intermittent, so it's at any point you can just say it's 20% efficient, and you get 20% of the nameplate efficiency as output. I would not say that only going renewables for South Africa specifically, because we're in a very unique context here in South Africa, where we don't have neighbors that we can get lots of power from when we need it. It's very different to Europe, very different to America, in the way that they've got independent power producers online that are providing lots of gas power when it's needed in the evenings. We're very different here. So if we go directly just into solar farms and wind farms, it's going to actually drive up the price of electricity extensively, unfortunately, for providing power in the mornings and the evenings when we have our evening peak demand. Unless we meet that demand, we'll have load shedding for the next 10, 15 years.
Unfortunately, not the story that we are told on a wholesale basis. But Khustaz, you know, what's your parting shot to us?
Well, my parting shot is simple, is that from a civil society point of view, we need to really work really hard. Now, let me just mention something. You know, the middle class has not been given a break on these tariffs. The lower income households have been given 10%. Obviously, the 8% have been shifted to higher users. Why is it that the middle class that carries a lot of burden in this country has not been considered for a relief, which is coming up from the 1st of April, even in July? I think that is something that we need to look into. So from a civil society point of view, South Africa needs all the hands on deck that it can help to get out of this problem. The middle class must be heard. They must get a benefit of a relief as well from that tariff of 18%. So municipalities must take note of this, and we are saying to them, they must not increase by more than 5% so that the middle class can also feel that they are being heard and they're being taken care of. Currently, they're just being burdened and no one is listening to them. Thank you, Saki.
Well, that's where we're going to leave it, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Matthew Cruz is Head of Business Intelligence and Public Relations at Hohm Energy, and StandUp SA organizer and spokesperson Khustaz Mtwentwe also speaking to us there on how parliamentarians voted against setting up an ad hoc committee to probe the allegations of widespread corruption and criminal cartels at Eskom. Feel free to let us know your views on that as well. At Morning Live SABC is where you can write to us.